Oh, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News. So good to be back with you. It is a best of week. It is Wednesday. And Wednesday? Wednesday. It's the middle of the week. It's hump day, isn't it? If you don't know who we are, this is a great week to be with us because it's our first week we've taken off in 7 months of doing this every single weekday. But because we've taken it off, we don't want to leave you with nothing, so we're doing a best of. The best ofs are little clips from the last 7 months, bits and pieces that have been pulled out. They're both clips that have been requested by people who are regular watchers, and also clips that I found interesting and clips that have been popular. So that's sort of what we're throwing into the mix and putting out there for you to see. So if you don't know who we are, if you're just meeting us for the first time, kia ora, evening, welcome to the show. And it's a good week to be with us because you will see a bit more about who we are and what we do. Tonight, Heather du Plessis-Allan goes all mean girls on a 16-year-old. We're going to have a look at how Christopher Luxon actively spreads disinformation, actually. And it's disinformation because he knows it to be false, but he still spreads it. Dr. Anna Brooks is going to be in this show on long COVID. Now, that was a conversation from actually fairly recently. It was from the end of September. So it's probably the one where we talk about going away from the traffic light system. Probably. I don't know because the heading just says Anna Brooks long COVID. So I haven't done my prep for that. I apologize. Chester Burrows is a former National Party minister. He is criticizing the current National Party on how the gang patch ban they're throwing out there as pablum for the media and for their supporters won't work and is stupid. And also, I'm not entirely sure how to say this, but the heading of the clip I'm looking at just says, Sam Uffindel is a disgusting piece of shit. What's that one about? I guess we'll find out. Thanks for being with us. Hopefully you are new. If you are new, feel free to get involved. Obviously, any of the live chat you guys do tonight won't show in the show, but you can chat with each other. It's become a bit of a community, and people will be in the chat tonight, I'm sure, having a chat with each other about what's going on. So feel free to jump in there. Feel free to be a part of that as well. If you do like what we do and you want to get involved more, one of the things you can do is get involved in our Patreon, patreon.com/Big Hairy News. We've got about 20 or 30 people in there who are patrons at the moment. Thank you for all your help. If you're enjoying the independent news and you want to get involved, it can be as little as $5, and the levels we've got to go through to $250. And yeah, we're keen to get you on board. This is the only funding we've got at the moment for this. I talked last night about the YouTube algorithms because we're doing a New Zealand show for a New Zealand audience, meaning New Zealand, mostly New Zealand news. We don't, as you can see by our Big Daddy Trump up there, we're not going to ignore international news, but it's mostly New Zealand news for New Zealand audience. We're never going to be big enough for the YouTube algorithms to pay us. You know, you need to get 1 million. When you get 1 million views on YouTube, you make about $2,000 for that, for about 1 million views. It's an approximation, but it's about right. So that's never going to be us, ever in 1 million years. Because, you know, when we're talking New Zealand stories to New Zealand audiences, you know, you're talking at best, and we're not here yet, but at best, thousands of views, hundreds to thousands of views, but not hundreds of thousands of views per clip. So, yeah, we're going to have to, if we're going to do this permanently and long term, we're going to have to find other funding. And one of the ways we're finding other funding at the moment is through our Patreon. If you want to get involved, love to have you on board. If you don't, enjoy the content. At some stage in the future, we will add more benefits to Patreon. There is already behind membership wall stuff there, but there'll be more of it. But at the moment, enjoy the content, pass it around, hashtag share our shit. And we look forward to, I guess, you joining in, connecting with us. You can go to our Facebook page as well if you want to connect directly. And other than that, let's just get into the show. Let's get into the show. Thanks for joining us. Here is some more best ofs for you as we go through your Wednesday night. I didn't know what had happened until the weekend with this Heather du Plessis-Allan situation. I saw this story in Spinoff over the weekend. This story in Spinoff is titled, Heather du Plessis-Allan should be ashamed of how she bullied my daughter. So that, of course, pricked the ears up. We didn't do a show last night because we were off celebrating the Queen. So tonight's the first chance we've had to talk about it after the weekend. I will come back to this because there is a bit at the end here that I think is warranting of reading. But I would like to play you some audio. And because it's just audio, because I believe Newstalk ZB, they either never uploaded it, which I find problematic because they upload everything, or I think what's more likely is they deleted it in the weekend. So I have audio to play for you, and I'll probably just leave this picture there while I'm playing the audio because it's literally just an audio file off the cut wall, and you can have a listen for yourself. So there's a few clips to play. The first clip is actually really interesting because it's Heather du Plessis-Allan talking to Izzy Cook You know how we talked about this as well when we were talking about how there was that $5,000 fee for traffic engagement if they were going to march in the streets, and we talked about that, and we were like, the council's not going to pay for it; they have to pay for it. What are they going to do? Well, Newstalk ZB talked to Izzy about that as well, and I want to just play this in its entirety. It's only 90 seconds because I want you to hear the tone of Heather du Plessis-Allan in this one. She's very engaging. She's very nice. She's very encouraging, and I think this all just adds to the abhorrent nature of the second interview. So this is before the strike, the Schools for Climate strike. I don't know the title of that. I keep getting it wrong. Before they did it, when the news came out that the council wanted $5,000 out of these teenagers if they were going to have a hold of it. Have a listen to this. So this is the first interview. This is before it happened. This is not the interview that we're going to look at more closely.
Wellington school students will have to foot a $5,000 bill if they want to protest climate inaction. The School Strike for Climate group had planned to walk to Parliament next Friday, but they don't have the money to pay for the private traffic management services to safely protest. Izzy Cook is one of the organisers. Hi, Izzy.
Hi.
So you guys can't pull together $5,000?
No, it's pretty difficult. We've asked some other organisations for funding, but yeah, it's not looking like we're going to get there.
What did they say? They can't afford to help?
Well, most of the organisations that we talked to are actually really generous. They do give us a bit of money, but $5,000 is a lot of money to raise.
Yeah. Wellington City Council, is it fair enough? They paid for the last two protests. Is it fair enough that they don't pay for this one?
It's definitely a pretty complicated issue. Wellington City Council has said to us that they can't afford to fund this one. Which is interesting, but I think one of the biggest issues is that, of course, as school students or, people under the age of 18, we can't vote. So it's one of our few ways of kind of expressing our opinions in a democratic society. So it makes things difficult for us, for sure.
What are you going to do instead if you can't march?
So in Wellington, the protest has changed to just being a rally that meets at Parliament at 12 p.m.
And that you don't need any traffic management for that?
No, we don't.
Yeah, and good thing Trevor Mallard's not there in case he turns the sprinklers on you, eh?
Yeah, probably.
Jokey joke.
Good on you, Izzy. Best of luck with it. Izzy Cook, Climate Strike for School Strike for Climate, right. Wellington organiser.
So it was lighthearted. It was free. It was a minute 42, and it was like, oh, well done, good on you. Yep, go for it. It was nice. Yeah, it was lighthearted. And then, of course, they did their strike for climate change. Izzy Cook comes back on ZB. And if that's your experience of being on ZB, biggest radio station in the country, dominant in all forces of media, you'd be like, oh, last time I spoke to Heather, that she was nice, that was fine. The story that her mother wrote, or the article or post that her mother put out, basically looks like that Izzy didn't even tell her parents that she was going on ZB. I mean, maybe she should have, but I guess if you've just had that lovely interaction, maybe you wouldn't think twice about it. So this is the interview after the strike. And I'm not playing the whole thing, but I've picked out a couple of salient points because there's one part that everyone's talking about, which is the demeaning part. So the tone has changed, and Heather du Plessis-Allan tries to nail down the 16-year-old with specifics and snidey sideways comments. Like I think at the end of this clip, when they're talking about feeding the world, she goes, okay, so they can go hungry. Just think about, if you've seen the movie Mean Girls, just think about Mean Girls, or think about that bitchy girl in school that always wanted to get the last word in and always wanted to kind of to finish with a mocking comment as opposed to an actual conversation. So this is the latest conversation on Friday. Heather du Plessis-Allan talking to Izzy about how we're going to feed people.
How many people does our dairy and beef industry
I am going to
feed?
stop there. It's going to pause. It's going to come back. But one thing I forgot to mention, and please, if you don't see it, obviously, just listen to the patronizing tone, speaking to her like she's a moron. Like, okay, now, how many people, just listen to the tone. It's just revolting.
How many people does our dairy and beef industry feed?
I'm not exactly sure, but I do know that most of the industrial farming in New Zealand is actually exported overseas. So most of it doesn't even feed New Zealanders.
So are we happy if people overseas go hungry?
I don't think that if we aren't eating beef, we can't be producing other
Good
crops.
answer.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that people overseas are going hungry. They could just begin to produce crops locally and begin to eat locally as well, which would be much more sustainable.
So they need to feed themselves.
So they need to feed themselves. Really, roll my eyes while I say that. It's already revolting in my opinion. It's just gross. Now remember, 16 years old, it's aspirational. They've got these ideas. They want to investigate. You know, you spoke to a 16-year-old in 1981. So how are you going to stop apartheid? I don't know, but I want to get out here in the streets and say no to segregation. Well, but how are you going to stop it? Oh, but so you're okay with them losing their workers? How are you going to do it? You know, you don't. They're young people who are aspirational and trying to give something a go. Got a couple of questions I'm going to play for you because I just wanted to show you the tone of the interview and the ridiculous nature of the conversation. And then I'll play you the bit that I might have to leave the room for. Probably have to take my headphones off. So she's asking, Heather du Plessis-Allen is asking Izzy about where are we going to make money? Just where? And look, you may agree or disagree with Izzy's response that maybe we don't have to focus on beef. I'm paraphrasing, but it's actually an okay answer. Maybe there's other ways to feed the world. My paraphrase, you know? So, but Heather du Plessis-Allen goes on to try and make a fool of her and try and nail her down.
So what are we going to do then? If we're not sending our dairy and beef overseas to try to make some money to pay for you to go to school, what are we going to make money from, Izzy?
Because your parents are farmers to pay for you to go to school. It's like, this is not what we're talking about. Another question here. And this is the part that goes into the ugly, but there's two more clips. The first one's short because another one of their demands is about air travel. And I get it. There's a lot of climate change activists who want to stop air travel, stop the emissions going into the environment through planes. And so one of their demands is about air travel and unnecessary air travel. So Heather du Plessis-Allen asks her a question around that.
Izzy, how do you ban unnecessary air travel, which is one of your demands? How do you I mean, okay, so I'm going to fly up for a conference. I think that's necessary. Do you think that's necessary?
No, I do not.
How do we ban that? Who's going to be the guy who stands there and goes, Heather, you're banned? Who's going to be that person?
I'll say again, in the 1960s, 70s, and 70s, if a 16-year-old was in the street protesting against the Vietnam War, do you think they had all the answers? Oh, so how are you going to stop the draft? I don't fucking know. I just want to stop the war. Or how are we going to do? I don't know. I want the planet to be alive in 100 years from now. I'm 16. I don't want to be dismissive to Izzy either. But you know what I'm saying? It's like this is a 16-year-old who is trying on. Please, I'm not being patronizing to 16-year-olds, but trying on for size the political leanings and the desire that this particular individual wants for the future. They may change in 5 years from now. She may have answers to those questions in 10 years from now. She's 16. Now, this is the bit that I got furious about. And because of the system that I'm using, I can't stop it. It's 1:44. How do I ask this of you? If this was your 16-year-old being spoken to by a grown-ass woman who is a professional journalist and a broadcaster, I'd like to know how you would feel once your 16-year-old got off the phone. That's all I'll say. So basically that question about air travel was a setup. She was setting her up because she'd been looking through her Instagram pages. Well, allegedly, this is what the mother has asserted, because Izzy was recently in Fiji on a plane to get to Fiji. So Heather du Plessis-Allen sets her up and then embarrasses her. And it's the laughter that's the worst part for me. The laughter. So demeaning.
Am I allowed to go to Fiji? Is that necessary?
In the current climate crisis, I don't think that that's necessary.
When was the last time you were on a plane?
I'm not sure. Maybe a few months ago, to be honest.
Where'd you go?
Fiji.
Izzy! Izzy! Don't you care about the climate, Izzy?
Of course I care about the climate.
Not enough. You went to... You went to Fiji. Izzy, come on, mate. Are you serious? Are you serious, Izzy?
No, it's pretty
Are you still there?
It is pretty ironic, but to be honest, it's not really a trip that I wanted to go on, but I can't really get out of it.
Why'd you go? Why'd you go?
My parents wanted to go.
Izzy,
I didn't want to go.
How are you embarrassed that your parents did that to the planet and then forced you to do it as well?
Of course I'm not embarrassed.
Did you
If
have a
you look at
terrible
the-
time?
Not really. I didn't have to do anything.
See, I'm sorry, mate. Listen, you're such a champion. I think you've got a brilliant future ahead of you. And are you doing another strike soon?
I'll just demean you one more time,
Yeah,
though.
we'll look to.
Good. We'll talk to you again. I might get you back on the show. Izzy Cook, who's a school strike for climate Wellington organizer. Anyway, Rod Orham's going to be with us on a similar subject.
Honestly, I be real. In your in the comments, you're a 55-year-old parent at this stage. You've got or a 50-year-old parent or a 45-year-old parent, and you've got a 16-year-old daughter who's standing up for what she believes in. Forget if you do or you don't or whatever the cause is. And that's the response from a seasoned journalist, mother of one, broadcaster on the most powerful media outlet in the country. I'm ropeable again. If I was in a radio station now, I'd need to play some ads. Honestly, it's just one of the most repugnant things. And I've heard some fucking repugnant things. I've probably done some fucking repugnant things, but it's one of the most repugnant things I've ever heard of a broadcaster. It's just disgusting. It's repulsive. And if she hasn't already apologized and mea culpa, hearing it again, I think I will be making a complaint to the Broadcasting Standards Authority, and I think probably there will be a lot of people who will. I'm not encouraging you to. I'm not interested in doing like a pile on, but I think I'm going to, because it was absolutely revolting. Absolutely revolting. That's the standard of journalism. That's the standard. Actually, no, that's the character of the person who is the feature host on the afternoons in Newstalk ZB. Fuck the journalism. That's the character of the person. Grown ass woman, mother, journalist, speaks to a 16-year-old lad. Agree or disagree? Like, let's say it's your child, your grandchild, your sibling who believes in something that you don't believe, but they get treated like that on the radio. It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. There was a conversation between the AM show and Christopher Luxon this morning about youth offenders, and the ACT Party want to bring ankle bracelets into youth offenders, basically 11 to 14-year-olds wearing ankle bracelets. And so this doesn't mean home detention, whilst that does come up in this conversation. This means kids going to school, intermediate age kids going to school wearing ankle bracelets. That's what ACT wants. Christopher Luxon was asked about that this morning on the AM show. That's where we pick up the conversation.
I haven't seen the detail of it, but we wouldn't support that. What we are saying is, look, the government's got the balance all wrong here. We do need serious offences for, serious prosecutions for serious offenders. And the second thing we need is we need to make sure that we're actually supporting the victims. And the victims here are those shop owners, and they deserve to feel safe in their businesses and their communities, and they're not.
But you say Labor is not being tough on crime. You wouldn't go as far as ankle bracelets for these young offenders. What would you do for those under the age of 16 to encourage?
Now, this is a very good point, right? Now, the opposition is in a position where they either can say anything or they don't have to say anything, because they're not going to be forced to make policy until they would be a government, and they're not the ones making policy, so they don't need to say anything. However, what Mr. Luxon is doing at the moment with this is he's saying Labor's not doing enough, and now he's saying, no, that's too far for us for ACT. And when being challenged on where are you then, to me it kind of comes like, well, there's one answer, but the one answer kind of screams in the face of the things that he's saying, which is we don't have the tools in place at the moment. So ACT is too far, Labor's not far enough, we're in the middle, so what are you going to do then? And there's actually no real answers that come from him.
Increase the penalties on them.
Well, the reality is the system today already has a series of escalating, actions that you can take, and they range from family conferences, of which we were doing way too many, frankly, right through to, residential youth facilities for serious offenders.
So what he's just said is the system does have the answers right now. So it's really a confusing message, because he's going, Labor's not going far enough. He's going, the system's not working. ACT is going too far. And then his next answer is, the system has in place already what we need. Well, so hang on. If the system has in place already what we need, and ACT is too far, what do hang on, what he's saying, because I think one of the things he's trying to say is he's holding, for example, the courts, the Labour Party responsible for what the courts are deciding and what the judges are imposing in their sentences. Because he's now actively saying we have the tools we need in the system now. At the same time, he's saying the system now is not working. At the same time, he's saying ACT is too far away. We don't want to go that far. So it's a real menagerie of mixed messaging. And as I said, being a little bit gracious to him, he's allowed to do that because he's in opposition. But if we already have the tools, but the system's not working yet, but we've got the tools, then what exactly are you saying, Mr. Luxon?
The serious offending end is where we need to see much a stronger action from the government, because that's the piece that's actually driving 25% of all the RAM raids. And so that's our question is there's nothing here for serious offenders. There's nothing here in terms of support of victims. And what we saw yesterday was just re-announcements of programs that already exist today.
Now, if what he's saying is the things are in place to be able to be used, but they're not being used, is that, I ask you, a Labour Party government issue? Is it a justice system issue? Who is the person or the people or the group that starts implementing harsher penalties? So if what he's saying, let's use an example. If you could get a $500 ticket for a fine for doing something, but you're only being given out $100 fines at the moment, like that's what the system's doing. And he's saying, well, they should be $500 fines. And he's not saying fines, but I'm using an example of an escalating consequence. Then who is the responsibility to award that $500 fine? Is it Jacinda on the 9th floor? Or is it someone else? Now, that's actually a question for me. I don't know how much direction the courts take from the ministry or how that works, but I don't know necessarily if it's a government problem. If the tools are already in place to deal with them, they're just not being dealt with.
Would you support home detention?
Well, look, there are components from family conferences to home detention to community services to residential youth facilities. We should be using all of the tools and getting the appropriate consequence for the response.
Now, let me say this again. At the start, he said family conferences, of which there's too many. You just heard the sentence. He used the range of things. And one of the examples he gave of the tools we had were family conferences. So hang on, Mr. Luxon. What is the correct number, according to you and National, of family conferences that's going to help? At the moment, it's too many, but you acknowledge it's a tool to be used. Can I please have some clarity from you? Can we, the public, have some clarity from you that if it's a tool to be used, as you've just acknowledged, but there's currently too many, what? You'd like to see 10% less, 20% less? What is it? So there's this mixed messaging again. I mean, I'd rather he come out and say, take a position like family conferences are crap, let's get rid of them all. But to say there's too many of them, but we should use them, what are you saying? And we often talk about the optics and the narrative within politics. The optics here are, I don't understand what you're saying. It sounds like you're just fishing for words and throwing shit against the wall and see what's going to stick. And it's confusing.
That we've got.
Because home detention would involve some kind of electronic monitoring, which essentially would be ankle bracelets.
Yeah, look, I think there's other things that we need to be focusing on. I mean, the big thing that I'm really concerned about, and I just don't think New Zealand has registered, is that 55% of our kids are not going to school today. 100,000 kids in this country are chronically
That's a big damn lie.
That is a big linkage into RAM raids and one of the big causes for why we're seeing what we're seeing. We've got a minister, fortunately, who's also the Minister of Police, is also the Minister of Education. And I keep saying he should probably have a talk with himself to work out how we actually fix truancy, because that's one of the major drivers here.
I should point out that truancy, in terms of regularly attending school, is attending for 9 days out of 10. In terms of
and chronic truancies, 7 days out of 10.
Note this. When he made the call for 55% of people away, he did not say chronic truancy, because that's not the stat. Right? I've got the stats from the ministry. The stat is not chronic truancy. So Melissa has just said it's 1 day out of 10. And Mr. Luxon has come back and said, yeah, but chronic truancy is 3 days out of 10, which is not the stat that he just gave. So he's now giving information out, which is not actually the 55% he's talking about. It's a different percentage. And I'll show you. I have the numbers.
But all I just say to you is they are not statistics that a developed country should be very proud about. And they wouldn't be statistics that would be acceptable in other small advanced economies around the world either.
All right. Take a breath. Take a breath. I think about Hamilton when I say that now. Take a breath. So we showed this last week. We're showing this again today with a few more add-ons to it, because if he's going to keep lying, we're going to keep reminding. This is the stat that Mr. Luxon is talking about, and I've actually got the numbers here. Let me show you. Look, this is the stat. 2022 term number 1, 46.1%, if you're looking at the screen, of students attend more than 90%. So it's the 1 day in 10. So when he said, but it's 3 in 10, that's not the stat here. 3 in 10 is actually here. Students attending for more than 70% is actually 13%, right? So that's not the stat that's got to do with 55% attending. So we're clear to start with, right? I have this stat. We're going to come back to this in a minute. So term 1 of this year, regular student attendance defined by the Ministry of Education as away for no more than 10% of available half days. And as we said last time, that's 1 day every 2 weeks, right? Plumbed new depths in term 1 with 46.1% of students nationwide meeting the benchmark, the worst term 1 performance in the COVID era. Now, the question we always need to ask is why? Absences due to COVID-19 combined with the early onset of winter illnesses resulted in record high absences for short-term illnesses and medical reasons in term 1. Now, in term 1, we were still under the 7 days isolation if you are a close contact of COVID. So that means me and Chewy live in different houses, or at least that's what we tell the public, so you don't make any rumors about us. If me and Chewy went out and had a beer, and then we were together for an hour in the same room, and one of us came down with COVID, the other one under the term 1 rules would then have to isolate for 7 days. So it's not like it is now, which is the household contacts. It's everyone in close contact. That finished at the end of February. Now, that's about 5 weeks into term 1. So for half of term 1, the rules were every single person who comes into contact with COVID for more than 15 minutes needs to isolate for 7 days. For the second half, it was household contacts only. So that has skewed the numbers significantly as well. This is what the ministry said of the absences in term 1. We have seen absences due to parental family concerns that attendance at school is unsafe because of the risk of contracting COVID-19. Now, Mr. Luxon is calling for parental responsibility right now. He's making it actively clear. My children, my 2 school-age children, were out of school in term 1 for about 4 or 5 weeks because of this. So what Mr. Luxon is actively telling me is parental responsibility, parental responsibility, parental responsibility. So parents have made decisions in term 1 to keep their kids out of school and be remote. And that's the reason the numbers were down. So doesn't that therefore mean he's criticizing my decisions as a parent? Because that's my child will be one of these children, both of my children, because we as parents chose to keep both of them out for their safety and for the safety of the community around them. Regional feedback indicates that as well as the impacts of studying at home, if they are close contacts, so that was the first half of the term, or unwell, there may be impact on parents of COVID fatigue and of attendance seeming less important. Right, that's part 1. Chewy, do you want to, we won't go to your RNZ thing yet because there's part 2 coming up shortly. Do you want to comment on any of that yet? What I've just done is explained why in term 1, there was a 55% regular attendance and a 46% non-regular attendance, which means they were off for more than 1 day a fortnight.
I mean, I think anybody would realize that term 1 absences were going to be a lot, right? But here we are 6 months later, and Luxon can just hammer that and link them together. Ram raids are up. So's truancy. That's what I'm going to talk about. And you guys can just draw a direct correlation between those 2 things. Ram raids are a huge blight on this country. They're only happening in Auckland,
And the point you're making is right, because he's using present tense about the truancy. Whereas we're now, for those who don't have children at school or don't know, we're getting towards the end of term 3. So he's using the term 1 data in the present tense as a talking point, and I believe he knows it's not the case, which is why, in my humble opinion and my honest held belief, is he is actively spreading disinformation.
The other thing I was going to say, and this again plays into Luxon being a rank amateur at this. He has had no experience in any of the things that he's talking about. He hasn't had a justice portfolio. He hasn't had an education portfolio. He's just there to hammer these talking points. And it is Labor is soft on crime because they always are. And Labor is bad on the economy because they always are. And this is the same thing that National has. They've dusted out the old drum and they're just going to bang that all the way to the election day. It's important that the journalists and people like us just push back against this shit, because there's so many people that'll go, oh, yep, preconceived biases, I agree.
Let's now get to the current information we have, right? Because remember, Christopher Luxon is saying 46%, well, he's saying 55% of kids are attending school. So what it means is, according to the data I just showed you, which I'll bring up again, which is the actual core data, as you can see, 46.1% are away, right? But there is new data, and I'll show it to you. RNZ talked about it last week. Principals had worried August, this is from last week, principals had worried August would be the worst period for winter illnesses, but Education Ministry figures show attendance averaged 82.5% for the first 4 weeks of the current school term, an improvement on 79% for the last 5 weeks of the second term. So that means the last 9 weeks of school average about 80% attendance. Not 55, that means about 20% away. So those numbers are current, they're new, they're today. This is one thing that I was a bit annoyed, a little bit of a tangent here, a little bit annoyed about this point from the RNZ report as well, Chewy, because you know what we've been saying about masks and stuff in schools. This is what
absolutely.
they say.
Yeah.
But this is from the was it from the ministry, or this might be from it might be from the Canterbury Primary Principals Association, maybe, looks like. Probably is, yeah. It says this: illnesses among staff are still high. Among students, not quite so much. We've got 90% of our kids here this morning, and that's really good. And that's better than it was through COVID. We were down to about 76 to 80%. Wearing face masks has made a real difference in preventing the spread of respiratory illnesses in classrooms, she said.
But hang on.
So let's just be fair and say Labor government, like we said, as soon as we went into orange, fucked up significantly, because as soon as they took away the mandatory wearing of masks in schools, which they did under orange, we got hit really badly again. So let's say it again. The principal in question here is saying this: wearing face masks had made a real difference in preventing the spread of respiratory illnesses in the classrooms. Now, remove classroom and say your workplace, or, I mean, buses are supposed to have masks on, or the pub watching the rugby. Wearing face masks makes a real difference. Sorry, Cherry, where you go?
I was just going to say that people on Telegram tell me that masks don't do anything.
Yeah, I'd like to see those people go and get an operation, like a heart operation, and be happy that their doctor doesn't wear a mask when they're doing that operation. If not,
I'd love personally, when I'm having abdominal surgery, I like my surgeon to just full face sneeze right into my open abdomen. It's good. I'll just shake it off.
Well, if you're going to follow one of the Dunedin Mayoralty candidates, that'll be fine, because he doesn't believe in viruses at all. That's a little side. That's a side note, though. Hey, now I want to go back to this AM show. So look, if he keeps talking about it, if he keeps using that number of 46% truancy or 55% attendance, we're going to keep talking about it. And I'm sorry if we end up sounding like a broken record. You guys need to share it. You are the guys that need to get this out there. And while you're there, sign up to our Patreon. Welcome to the show. Good friend of the show, Dr. Anna Brooks. Anna, good afternoon, slash evening to you.
Good evening, afternoon to you too.
You doing well? How's your day going?
Not too bad. Down here in Wellington after a COVID-free flight, COVID-free city. You know, it's quite good being COVID-free.
So how were the masks on the flights, the people around you?
Non-existent.
Oh, really? Not a one?
No, there was a one or two. Like it was
Right.
that bad. Yeah, like surprisingly bad. I sort of thought, it would be sort of peeling back, but it was fairly mask free. I was trying to gauge whether I sort of thought it was 95% mask free, 98%, 99. So yeah, so we really are in a moved on society, I think.
I saw an email from a school in the last couple of days, and it was very casual and very light-hearted. It wasn't making a joke, but it was said in a less serious way. Oh, we've got a bit of a COVID cluster at the moment. And I'm like, isn't that weird? Sort of a week out from when all these restrictions were less, that there's a bit of a COVID cluster all of a sudden in a school.
Yeah.
So yes, it's weird. It's weird. It's strange. But listen, the reason I contacted you today, and thank you for giving us a few minutes during your conference time, is I saw I don't know if it's interesting, but certainly, and on New Zealand Herald this morning, they do like a short series of adverts, and it's not adverts, sorry, news stories. They tell a news story and they do a news bulletin in like 5 minutes. And they were talking about long COVID, and I thought, I know someone who knows a bit about long COVID. So I watched it and I went, this sounds a bit familiar to me. So I thought, I'll get Anna, see what you've got to say about it, because it sounds like the government's saying, gosh, who knew this long COVID thing? Who knew? No one's talked to us about this. So let me play the story first, and then I'd like to get your take on it.
And there's no way of saying quite how much the aftermath of COVID is hurting New Zealand's economy. A report by the Australian government estimates around 31,000 people are calling in sick to work each day because of long COVID symptoms. It shows Australia lost 3 million working days in the first 6 months of 2022 to illness. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says New Zealand doesn't have this depth of analysis, but the Health Ministry is looking into long COVID research.
Like everyone in the world, we'll be continuing to track this. It's obviously a very new situation, and I don't even think there's a diagnostic tool per se for it at the moment. And so therefore, for people who are experiencing it, it'll be, potentially challenging.
And those are the latest New Zealand.
So there you go. So what I read from that is that, there we go, is that Australia has been tracking long COVID. They've lost 3 million work days in the first 6 months of this year. 31,000 people, I think it's a day or a week, are phoning in with being sick. And the New Zealand government, via the finance minister, says we don't have the depth of analysis that Australia had. So in other words, they're saying, as far as I can see it, we can't comment on that because we don't know, because we haven't been doing the research like Australia has. And that's when I went, I know someone who's been doing some research around long COVID, Dr. Anna Brooks. So tell us what you're hearing, and tell us what we're missing, and tell us what the government has or hasn't done in the situation.
Well, yeah, a few things came through there, like that constant phrase of it's all very new, we don't know much yet. It gets a bit tiresome to keep hearing. What is new? We've known since 2020 that long COVID was always going to be a problem. And it has been a problem here in New Zealand since 2020. So it is not something new. It is something that has been actively dismissed for a very long time. So that was the first thing. And then absolutely true, there is no diagnostic tools. Guess what my research is trying to uncover? A diagnostic tool.
All right.
That's exactly the focus of my research, is to unpack and understand, what is happening in the dysregulated immune system, essentially. Can we find a diagnostic marker so that we can help validate people who are going through this and all the rest of it? But guess what? Literally $0 has been invested in this country in biomedical long COVID research. Now, that's another massive emphasis that I want to get across here. Yes, the government have now invested, they released money, I think it was 9 million across, I think it was 23 projects that were variations on understanding the vaccine uptake and the COVID response. And all of these things are all very critical, not dismissing any of those aspects, but not one single project is dedicated to the biomedical understanding of this illness. So there's going to be projects that will uncover prevalence. All of these things are really, really necessary. So as I say, everything that was funded is necessary, but not one of those projects is biomedical research. And another aspect of that, it's not traditional for biomedical research to come out of a ministry, but, you know, like the numbers that are floating around internationally for biomedical research in the space are huge. You know, it was over $1 billion in the US and, you know, several millions in the UK. And we've had $0 in the biomedical research space to understand what's going on with long COVID.
So what I hear you saying, and from what Grant Robertson was saying there, I jotted down 3 lines. And one of the lines was, it's a new situation. You've already referenced that because it's not a new situation.
No.
Another line I jotted down was potentially challenging. Like it might be, it might not be, you know, we'll see. And the third thing was the no diagnostic tools. What I hear you saying is you've been working on what could be a diagnostic tool, but the government hasn't really addressed or given funding or helped go through that process. So now they're at a point where they've gone, well, there's no but there could have been a diagnostic tool if someone within the structure of the bureaucracy had have decided to drive some money into the area you're working in. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's sort of a fair analysis of that, because, you know, like research by nature, you know, we have to explore, you know, avenues to be able to come up with a diagnostic tool. And there's been a ton of research, like, you know, the amount of research publications already on long COVID is phenomenal. And so again, it comes back to sort of calling this a new situation. It's not a new situation at all. You know, there's a ton of research that's coming through, but it's also always evolving as well. And the other thing that can be somewhat frustrating is sort of saying, oh, we've got to bring it back to the New Zealand situation because, you know, Omicron is new and we were all vaccinated. It's like, well, again, we're already hearing internationally that, you know, the biggest wave of long COVID is going to be from the Omicron. You know, our support networks exploded with people with long COVID. We already know this is happening here. And so yeah, some of these things become frustrating to continually hear that it's new, it's going to be a big problem, because we knew this all along. And so, yes, it is also tough when you sort of are immersed in the research, well connected internationally about hearing what could be strong leads to, you know, to develop diagnostics and things like that, and just not having resourcing to do so. Because, and, you know, in research, everything takes a long time, but do we have time? Do we want to be waiting? You know, when you look at the international groups of the millions of people suffering with this condition, we don't have time. This is it, you know, and referring to Australia talking about lost work days and all the rest of it. You know, even getting infected and not getting long COVID, the lost productivity is huge just in that alone. And then that's not to mention all of those people that are sort of saying, you know what, I can't go back to work. I cannot function in this post-COVID state. And some of those people might have a long COVID type state for 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, a year, forever. That we don't know how many are going to go on to permanently not recover. And all we're sort of, the plea here is to escalate the demand in this space to get answers. We absolutely know that there are, you know, it's an organic biomedical or biological condition, and we need to sink resources into it so we can escalate and fast track diagnostic tests and treatments. And, you know, and we know that around the world that this is underway, and that's no excuse to sort of sit back and wait, if you like, when we could be helping New Zealanders here.
I just did some numbers while you were talking, and I did them based on a minimum wage type salary, which obviously not those 3 million lost days in Australia are not all minimum wage. But even if it was, that means the Australian economy has lost $500 million from people being off. So it doesn't seem to be a very long bow to go investing money into it, you know, to try and help that not be the situation. It's not very difficult to figure out how that can have a literal financial, let alone health payback as well. I was going to say, Anna, it's a kind of weird question to ask you, but would you be considered the foremost expert in long COVID research in New Zealand, or one of the foremost experts? Because it seems to be your area of research. Are other people quite delving into this as specifically as you are?
I don't know many others that are specifically diving into the biomedical side. We've got large networks of scientists, interested in understanding the impacts of long COVID, in a multidisciplinary way. But no, that we don't really have. I don't know of anyone else diving into the biomedical side. No, yeah.
Because obviously, if you are indeed the foremost expert in New Zealand, or if no one else is going into the biomedical side, and that's where you need to go to find diagnostic tools, I'm wondering, of course, has the government talked to you? Have they reached out? Are they asking New Zealand's foremost expert what they should be doing to find this diagnostic tool? Have you had any interactions with them at all?
Not in that regard, no. I guess the first step that has progressed is, as I say, funding some of these projects that are going to understand the scale. So, documenting how many people have this condition. But I guess another analogy, or another comparison, is the warp speed that a vaccine was generated. And I think that's what a lot of people are saying in this space, is that sure, we all stops were pulled out, to make sure that we got a vaccine as fast as possible. In fact, I lectured on it yesterday, and it was a matter of days. It was days before, the vaccine project kicked off, from days since the sequence of the virus was made public. It was like, right, let's create a vaccine. And there's just been no urgency to say, right, let's see what long COVID is, and let's stop this thing from happening. And when you were talking about investments, when we sort of try and document how much this is costing economies and things, we can't also forget that we're going to continually get long COVID, because we have now got no protections in place, and the virus is going to continue to circulate. And we know that you might get one infection and be fine. You might get another one and be fine. It might be your third one that you get long COVID, or it might be your fifth infection that you get long COVID. The point is for as long as this virus is circulating, we will continue to get an increased burden of long COVID. So, if we're going to accept that, because our government has accepted that and has told us that that's what we need to live with, if that is the case, then we need to be following up behind with tools to help people when they suddenly come down with this illness and cannot return to their work, their life, function as they once did.
The finance minister, acting prime minister, telling us that we don't have the diagnostic tools to look at this, obviously referencing that Australia does. What do we need to do now? Are you saying they don't? Australia doesn't?
No, nobody has a diagnostic tool. What I think what he was referencing there was probably saying that, I don't actually know what their systems are over there, like whether there is state by state or a nationwide ability to track long COVID. I haven't seen any mention of that, but obviously they've done some numbers there, and probably that sounded like that came from sick days, right? So people who were saying, hey, I'm off with COVID. So I don't know if that's that they're just surmising how many people have got long COVID, but there's certainly no diagnostic tools. What the way that you get diagnosed is what we call a clinical diagnosis. It's the same thing with ME/CFS, the other post-viral illness that many New Zealanders are already suffering with. These illnesses, because there's not a diagnostic test, you can't go and get a blood test and say, yes, you're suffering with this illness. What has to happen with ME/CFS is you have to be suffering for 6 months and have every other illness ruled out, and then that's when you're declared that you have this illness. With long COVID, it's the official diagnosis can be from 3 months. So what has changed in recent times is that your GP can now diagnose you with long COVID because there is a coding system. And whether or not that's been successful, we don't necessarily have much feedback on it. It's been a mixed response in our support groups, whether people are managing to get that diagnosis or not. But essentially the tools are in place now to go to your GP and walk through your symptoms and in some cases the epidemiology of your illness, because not everyone has validation that they were infected. All of those things, make it cloudy, but there is absolutely no diagnostic test. And worse than that, your tests come back normal. So you could be so critically ill, and it's mind-blowing that every single test you could run comes back normal. And so that is what we really need to work on, and that's what we're sort of trying to educate and make sure that the doctor's response is not, therefore there's nothing wrong. So our catchphrase is, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. It's just that we don't have the tools. We need to find the tools, and we need to do that quickly. So that's kind of where the space is. And we know that vascular damage is part of the picture. We know that a disrupted immune system is part of the picture. We just need to develop the tests that might pick this up. We're also, one of the places that we're sort of heading down the road of is the fact that we wander around taking for granted that our immune system is constantly keeping our latent viruses that we all live with, that we don't even give a second thought to. We all get Epstein-Barr virus, we get glandular fever in our teens. All of those things live in us permanently, nice, suppressed away, not causing any problems mostly. And one of the hypotheses behind long COVID is that maybe the SARS-CoV-2 infection wakes these viruses back up, and that's what's triggering a long-term illness. We know that there are links to this Epstein-Barr virus, or EBV, or the one that causes glandular fever. We know that there are links to ME/CFS, so chronic fatigue syndrome. We know that virus has been linked to that illness. So we're seeing some patterns emerging, but it's just incredibly difficult to get any traction because biomedical research is expensive, and we need resourcing to do this. And as I say, a ton of resourcing went into vaccine development, and it would just be wonderful if the same urgency was placed on preventing these potentially long-term illness for a lot of people.
Have you experienced as an academic, I'm going to use a weird word here, Anna, but kind of the lab work thinking about we'll give you your answer in a year isn't as sexy as the virus, which we'll get into now and save some lives. Is there anything to do with prioritizing what they think is more important today versus what I hear you saying about is going to be more important in the long run?
I think we can't hide behind the fact that on an international scale, the pandemic is now politicized. We can't deny that, right? So any government of any day, around the world doesn't want a burden of what's going to come, next term in a few years' time. So yeah, I think when you strip it back, it's not surprising that there's not a huge focus on the potential long-term harms of infections. But that doesn't mean that's a good thing, does it? It just means I think from my perspective, I just accept that that's politics. I think is all I can say to that.
Finally, as well, does that just mean now that we've got some things in place with GPs that what the finance minister was describing as an in-depth analysis, that now just comes with time? Like now that the things are in place, it's going to take 6 months to get that data to be able to reference back to, and that's really all we got to do now is wait until the data rolls in.
Yeah, so and as I say, some of these projects that are funded will basically help reveal how many New Zealanders are impacted by this illness. But what I would argue is that we should be doing them concurrently, because everyone that reaches out to me with this illness, they don't just want to be a number on a page. They don't want to be just a diagnosis. They want to understand what's happening and try and get diagnosed, but also try and get better. And we can't it's really, really tough fielding emails constantly where people are saying and they'll list off a barrage of very debilitating symptoms, and there's not much we can say back. And that's really, really rough. And so that's why sometimes it's tough as an academic, where sometimes people sort of assume it's your job, or some people might sort of say, oh, it's tough if you haven't got funding, as if it's my loss, if you like. And it's kind of like, this isn't about me and saying, oh great, I'm leading a study. This is so not about that. And that's what's quite difficult to get across sometimes, that it's as if you feel like you're filling your own bank account trying to get money, when really what I'm trying to facilitate is the massive demand from sick people who want answers. And that sometimes is hard to communicate, because it often feels like you're trying to win your own lottery, like that people think you're trying to win your own lottery, and you're like, no, this is not about me wanting to do, this isn't an excitement of research. This is, I want to facilitate people getting better.
Dr. Anna Brooks, Auckland University. Anna, thanks for joining us again today. We always appreciate you having you on. You're giving us some minutes now and then to share this out there. If you could say one thing to the Prime Minister right now about, what you need to see to help you get there, what would it be?
I would love to see more investment in the biomedical understanding of post-viral illnesses. Now.
Done. Just like
now.
That. Anna, thanks for your time. Appreciate you.
No problem. Catch you later.
Joining us is Chester Burrows, a former police officer, former MP for 12 years, in fact, former Minister for Courts, Associate Minister for Justice and Social Development, also the Deputy Speaker, currently working with, or just wrapped up working with, the Safe and Effective Justice Advisory Group. We want to say congratulations. Do you still use your titles? To the Honourable Chester Burrows?
Oh, no, Chester's fine.
Okay, Chester, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. A very interesting article featuring you this week I saw it on Stuff. We never know in this day and age where it's come from, because they all share with one another. But talking about the idea around gang patches, which is in the news at the moment. Now, you are someone who attempted to, maybe succeeded in, let's get the story, of actually banning gang patches in Whanganui, I think in 2011. So we want to know about your experiences, and we want to know about how effective it is to ban gang patches. So the floor is yours, sir.
Well, the idea of banning the gang patches came out of Whanganui itself through a local bill drafted by the Whanganui District Council. A local bill is always supported by the local MP, whether or not he agrees with it. But I thought that it was going to do some good, and so I was happy to support it. And it was an interesting situation, really, because you may recall that the mayor at the time was Michael Laws.
I do.
Quite a controversial figure, and so pushed it very hard, and it went through Parliament and was successful in being passed, but then fell to bits after that. And I guess there are 2 or 3 reasons for that. I think the first thing people want to say is, well, did it work? And the interesting thing is that it probably didn't, but it didn't have to, in that there weren't a whole lot of people wearing gang patches in every suburb or up the CBD every day in any event. So no one noticed a significant dropping off in the people wearing gang patches, because they weren't actually there in any event. But what happened was that the Hells Angels took a court action seeking a declaratory judgment around the legality of the legislation, because the legislation had been written in a way that said a number of specified areas listed by the District Council would be the centre of this legislation, in which gang patches would be banned. So that was various parks, various reserves, sports grounds, all of that sort of stuff, which was fine. But it was by some quirk of fate, it was within the legislation to draw a line around the whole of the Whanganui city area, all the residential area, and say, well, we're going to ban them all within this line. And that was obviously never really the intent of the bill when it went through the parliamentary process. But that's the way it came out, because it basically said, well, wherever the council want to ban them, they can ban them as long as they put them on a schedule. So the Hells Angels went to court and said, well, hang on, surely this can't be legal. And the court had a look at it and all the discussion in Parliament around the bill and what it was supposed to do and where people were supposed to be banned from wearing patches and all of that sort of stuff, and said, that's right, it's not legal to do that in the way that it's been done by the council, and pretty much stuffed it. And then it was over to the council to go back and seek another bill or seek an amendment or to fight it in court if they wanted to, but there was a change in mayor and the new regime decided they wouldn't bother. So the question about did it work in Wanganui is actually nobody knows, because it wasn't the situation we've got at the moment, where you've got huge influx of gangs in certain areas. You know, the focus has been around Auckland. Mm-hmm. We've had huge gatherings of people wearing gang insignia, and that's the subject that the current proposal is to gang, is to legislate against. But the problem you've got with that stuff is, how the hell do you police it? You know, if you've got 250 gang members riding down the southern motorway on the on a tangi of one of their dearly departed, and they're all got their gang patches on, are the police going to block the motorway and take their patches off them and confiscate them for a period of time and arrest them all and charge them and put them before the courts, and meanwhile hold up 50,000 other commuters trying to get home? And the answer is probably not. And the problem there is the proponents of the legislation have created an expectation amongst the public that they will. So then there's an uproar that they didn't do what they said they were going to do, and they've got the powers to do it, but they didn't do it, and the police cowards, why didn't they do it? You know, all of that sort of stuff. And pretty much everyone just gets pissed off, don't want to do it. They just, the police aren't happy because they don't want to spend their time doing something as ridiculous, confiscating gang patches. The public aren't happy because they expected a level of service which they're not getting. The proponents of the legislation aren't happy because, they didn't do what the law says they can do. So where do you end up? Well, it's pretty old, but you asked the question.
Yeah, for sure.
It's certainly do you see any parallels between the situation when you were in Wanganui, as far as there was a flare up in gang violence and they were like, well, we've got to do something. This is what we've come up with, and what we're seeing with it being sort of touted at a national level now?
Yes, there were a number of shootings. There was the killing of Gia Tutua, the little child who was asleep on her sofa on
her couch. I remember that.
Yep.
Yeah.
There were a number of other shootings. The police were fired upon. And so the town was pretty wound up about that, albeit this violence was confined to various suburbs that were either labelled Black Power or Mongrel Mob, pretty much. And that was it. However, Wanganui is a small town, so, wherever it was going to happen, it was going to affect everybody. But it wasn't a situation where you had heaps and heaps of gang members walking up the street wearing their gang insignia. And the other thing that's sort of different in this situation is that a number of those gang members in Wanganui are really just whānau and really just people who grew up in those neighbourhoods. So people knew them under lots of different hats. They just happened to be in gangs. That's a little bit different than the situation we've got now, where you've got a huge exponential growth in the number of gang members. You've got all those 501s coming back from Australia. They're prepared to be a hell of a lot more violent than they have been in the past. And also you just throw methamphetamine all over that and you just don't know where it's going to blow. So people have, yes, in Wanganui, there was a situation they didn't know how to attack it. And so the mayor decided he was going to do something. And that was what happened. So it's similar in that degree, but the levels were different and the activities were different. There were certainly shootings, but they weren't as many. There weren't 23 in 2 weeks or whatever it's been.
Yeah.
You go, Chewy.
So I guess my other question is, how did it resolve itself? Was it just left to fizzle out, or was there outreach, or did you grab the ringleaders and go, come on guys, sort it out? How did it resolve?
There are a number of things that happened. Well, the first thing was that the council lost the court case, and then it was over for the council to come back and do something with it. They had a change of leadership and decided not to bother, and that it was a waste of time. So that was one thing. The next thing was that things did drop off, but they dropped off because of all the criminal activity, and everyone got locked up for charges of murders and shootings and things like that. So basically the heat went out of the situation. I think also the gangs, the gangs who were peddling drugs, they would rather not be noticed. So they willingly rode out the street on their motorbikes without their patches on because they didn't want to be stopped and turned over and people looking in their pockets, essentially.
Mm.
Hey, I've got a question for you based on what you've just said. You may not have any more knowledge of this than, Chewy or I, but from your history and what you've done for work, maybe you do. You mentioned gang numbers going up. We've been talking about this the last month or so because it's been in the press. Let me just bring up a story here from that was in stuff.co.nz. It's simply, if you can't see it very clearly, it's fine because it's simply talking about the gang numbers going up. It says gang numbers have nearly doubled in 5 years, police say. I just want to read these paragraphs and I want to ask you the question. It says, since 2016, gang member numbers have nearly doubled across the country, according to police data. There are 8,061 gang members in New Zealand recorded on the national gang list as of June 2021, an increase of almost 4,000 since 2016. The information was revealed to staff under the OIA. Now, this is my question, because what I've been saying for the last couple of months, and you have just said that gang numbers have gone up, is that's not evidence that gang numbers have gone up. That's evidence that more gang associates have been recorded into the database. Now, I was just wanting to see if you had an answer to that of clarity, because, and I used the example, if I got new neighbours and I didn't know they had 4 kids because I never saw their 4 kids outside, then after week 2, I saw, they've got 4 kids. It wouldn't be, it's increased by 4 kids in the last day. It's like, that's only the first time I've seen their 4 kids. Is it a significant increase, or is the data just catching up like they're doing a database? So obviously they're adding more and more people to the database, or are they actually new gang members? Because how they describe it there doesn't quantify exactly there are new gang members. It means we're aware of more gang members.
Okay, so there's two or three things here, and I think the short answer is I think they are going up because certainly been more recruitment activity, and so, but how many of them are new members, or how many of them are now recognised affiliates, or are now wearing patches where they used to just be associates of the gang? And so, you have that question, what's a gang, who's a gang, and then who's a gang member? So for instance, there's sort of a title called Friend of the Gang. There may not be somebody who gets around wearing a gang patch, so hasn't earned his stripes or hasn't prospected for the gang or whatever, but actually has associations and affiliations, drinks with them, drinks in their pubs, goes to their do's and booze ups and things like that, and might as well be a gang member, because if push came to shove, he would probably line up with a baseball bat or a firearm or whatever alongside. The other thing is, I think police are working much harder now in trying to identify who's in and who's out. So it could well be that a lot of those numbers are people who are now identified as gang members. Not necessarily new on the scene, but now actually carry the label.
Right. So a claim of gang members have doubled can't be made of those, but the claim that gang numbers have increased is certainly accurate, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And we're seeing this, through the parole board. We're seeing active recruiting in prisons. We're seeing all sorts of things like that. And you have to accept that those numbers have gone up. I mean, the other thing is, of course, we've got more gangs than we've had previously. And they're more tooled up, more aggressive, more recognizable as gangs and this sort of stuff. I mean, for years back in the 80s and early 90s, you had sort of basically street gangs who were making up gang signs and gang names and colors and stuff like that. And they were, but those guys grow up, and then they grow up and tend to head into gangs in their numbers. So you talk about feeder gangs and those sorts of things.
You mentioned something in your last statement, the answer to my last question. It was one of the questions I wanted to ask you as well, to expand upon. I was working in Talkback in 2011. So this was a conversation that was heavily on my show often. And one of the comments that often came up was, what is a gang? And I remember that there was conversations around insignia on shirts, etc. And there was people saying, well, that could be a bowling club. If you followed that criteria, that could be a bowling club. And one wonders, and in the article that we talked about that you're quoted in, you state that we've agreed we're not bashing national here, so I'm not trying to do that, but I'm just trying to reflect this idea of banning gang patches as, quote, a big headline, In other words, it gets the media and the people talking, but it has a negligible impact on crime. That's what you're quoted to have said in the Stuff article.
I mean, as far as as far as that sort of strategy or policy goes, it does have a negligible impact. And it could, of course, have a negative impact, because if everyone takes their patches off, you don't know who's who in the zoo.
Yeah,
so you don't know who to take.
But it does make for good copy, is what you're saying. It makes good headlines in the newspaper. But just to also reflect on that, so how did you in 2011 decide what was a gang, and how did you decide what wasn't?
I'm going on memory now, but we did it by creating a definition of what a gang was, and sort of worked around organised criminal group. So for instance, it was funny that you say that, because I had this lovely little old Blue Rinse National Party lady who owned a Daimler, and all her friends who, funnily enough, also owned Daimlers, had their Daimler club, and they used to go for drives in the country and have coffee and white wine, and they had jackets, and they had Daimler club patches on the back of their jackets, and she very earnestly and quite tearfully asked me if she was ever going to be allowed to wear her jacket in Wanganui. And I told her that was going to be okay. They're not defined by the patch, they're defined by the activity, and we define it by criminal activity. And I think that's what any proposed legislation would do as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I'm thinking about other groups or other groups of people that may have criminal activity but not be gang affiliates. I wonder if there's some grey area there. But I'm more thinking about, I always think legislation has to be like cast iron, and it's difficult when it's got furry edges, and you're trying to think, how would that fit in?
We all in Wanganui also stipulated the gangs,
right?
So we named the gangs. So you couldn't have the sort of the Bridge Street Dirty Dozen setting up as a bunch of 11 and 12-year-olds running around smashing windows and causing mayhem. They wouldn't be a gang. They would just be used and need dealing to.
You say this would have a negligible impact on crime. I'm wondering, from your experience, I guess both inside the government and outside looking in, inside of Parliament, inside government and outside looking in, do you have any ideas of what would make a difference? One of the proposals going around at the moment is warrantless searches. There's concerns around that for the Bill of Rights, and of course people are saying we don't afford the Bill of Rights to just the good people. Everyone gets coverage under the Bill of Rights, and we give everyone coverage to ensure all of us as individuals have coverage. But like warrantless searches, do you think that's something that could cause a difference? Do you have concerns of that area? And what do you think is something we could do as a country to help things like what you're seeing in Auckland at the moment?
Okay, so I think there's a lot of things we could do, and some of them are an immediate response to an urgent and scary situation. So you may well then set up a big team. You may be able to give them some sort of temporary powers, or you may just throw a whole lot of resource at the issue, and then you just crunch everything that moves. So you see known gang members going down the street, you don't top them. You stop them, put them out, see what they're carrying and all the rest of it. Or you pick off their houses, knowing and expecting to know from information you've got as to what you might find there, execute those search warrants, and then of course you're going to find a whole lot of stuff that you didn't expect to find, but is also evidence of criminal activity, and lock them up for that. And what you're really doing there is shaking the tree so hard that it just brasses everybody off, because they can't move without the cops being there, and so they then start to button off themselves. So, but that's at the extreme end. Then there's the other stuff you do, like you identify the children of gangs in schools and throw extra resources and activities at them. You work hard to be able to work, say, with, for instance, the women in those gangs, because they're frequently the decision makers around the household, and the young ones who are going to grow up and not join the gang are going to be young ones who have come under the influence of, a strong and powerful wahine toa in there. It's going to be their grandma, or it's going to be their mother, or something like that. And I deal with people in gangs and associated with gangs, on a very, very frequent basis. And a lot of those kids grow up and don't be part of the gang because of what they've witnessed, and because they've been protective, and because of the intervention of someone. So the government could work hard to make sure that they are intervened with. But the other problem is there's a hell of a lot who grow up and just get inculcated into the gang because that's all they've known.
Yeah.
And you've got to work hard to break that cycle, and it's got to be across all those departments. You can't have education sitting there and saying, well, shit, but that's justice and it's got nothing to do with us. But the fact is that it's got everything to do with them, because 81% of people in prison don't read or write at their chronological age. You know, and that's hugely significant. So then, you know, the other thing is, of course, there's a hell of a lot of people who are in gangs have completely failed in the economy. So maybe MB can't sit off to one side and say, well, we're all about business and making the boat go faster, and gangs have got nothing to do with us. Yes, they have, because your inactivity or the inability of people who we've underskilled and educated poorly in another language and all this sort of stuff has meant that they are completely vulnerable within the workforce, and they make up such a huge percentage of people who aren't employed at a time when we've got incredibly low employment. So let's, you know, but I certainly agree that you can't have a situation like we've got at the moment and then implement something that's not going to work for 20 years until the intervention with that 6-month-old baby pays out when that kid's 21, you know, and is receiving his bachelor of whatever and going off to have a meaningful place in New Zealand society. So you can't afford the lag time. You've got to do things that are urgent, responding to an emergency situation, but you've got to do things that are working day to day.
Well, I agree with that 100%. So much. I'd love to see a headline like that.
There are all the recommendations we made to the government back in September 2019. And the problem we've got now is that we're going to be in election in an election year in about 3 or 4 months. And then the government will be too scared to do anything that might be described as soft on crime. And that's what bothers me. You've got a government there in numbers where they don't even need the Greens to pass legislation.
Yeah.
Yes. Hey, I've got a really inappropriate question, Chester, and I know you're going to say I'm not going to answer that question, but there's a reason I'm going to ask it. And after you refuse to answer it, I'll tell you why I asked it. Who did you vote for at the last election?
Yeah, I don't want to.
So mean, Pat.
All right, no, because the reason is, honestly, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to National at all, but there was a headline out of America that says, isn't it weird how all the Republicans, when they're leaving office, all of a sudden they get like socially aware and socially conscious and they make a difference and they make statements. The way you're speaking, I don't hear any National Party member speaking like this ever. And it feels like the kind of conversation I hear coming out of the left so much. And I'm saying that as a compliment, just so you know. I'm not trying to mock anyone.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, the first thing to acknowledge is that I was told I was in the wrong party by both parties. me and Shane Jones. I had a great billboard in the front paddock out the front of our house, which was advertising National. But I voted 100% on the project that we'd been working on, which was justice reform. And I wasn't going to get justice reform out of anything that was being said by the National Party. So they didn't get a vote out of us that election, but they'll probably get a vote out of us this election.
Before we go, unless you've got something else true, but you can come in. I know we've said we're not going to talk about national policy, which is fine. But what I'd like to know was if you could advise Mr. Luxon today on what he should be. I mean, you've said that the banning the gang patches is going to make negligible impact, and it's just a headline. If you could advise him on what he should be focusing on around, let's just say gangs, to keep it at that issue, what would you be telling him the focus should be? And the reason I'm asking that question is, in this show, what we always want is meaningful change and meaningful difference. So actually policies that Mr. Luxon could be focusing on that might actually help the issue rather than necessarily get the headline.
Well, firstly, I'd warn him that he's making a bet to have himself beaten with if he does actually win the election, because he's making a promise around banning gang patches that nobody can see can possibly work or live up to the expectations he's creating with the public. That's the first thing. The second thing is to fund. I would advise him to have policy that funded the police for temporary but abhorrent situations that need dealing with and can't be met within current budgets. So, you know, for instance, they need to throw a whole lot of resource at gangs, for instance. It may not need to be something that lasts forever. But at the same time, something radical and, and invasive needs to happen and disruptive needs to happen right now. And then I would advise him to get to the precision end of it, to go to those other government departments we talked about, and to tell them that criminal justice outcomes are just as much their concern in all of those other government departments. Even defence, for instance, if you look at 5% of the population of the New Zealand prison, it's been calculated that 5% of the New Zealand prison population comes out of the combat trades within the New Zealand Defence Force.
Wow.
Now, that's pretty scary because, you know, you got a whole lot by combat trains. These are people who are taught to take things to maximum heat, create maximum mayhem at the shortest possible time. And they can't go off and be a sniper or a turret gunner for telecom, you know. And so where do they go? Well, you know, they go to gangs.
Yeah.
And we really need to worry about that and recognise that it's a cross-government problem that needs to be dealt with across the portfolios and silos that government departments like to live in.
Chester, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for being available after my this afternoon phone call, you jumping in and saying, yep, you're going to come on board. Hopefully you're happy with the content that we've given today. And we haven't actually, you're not going to get phone calls from former colleagues tomorrow morning saying, what are you talking to them for? We're okay?
I think so. Yeah, we're right.
Former MP, former Minister for the Courts, Associate Minister for Justice, and Social Development, the Honourable Chester Burrows. Thank you so much for giving us some time this evening.
Cool.
Thanks,
All the
mate.
best. See ya.
Cheers.
This prick, is that the best way to start? This little prick. I'm so annoyed about this. I'm so annoyed about this for so many reasons, right? Now, if anyone wants to come at us for defamation or whatever, it is my honest held belief that this person is a little bitch and I think they're a prick. All right. That is my honest held belief. And I will stand up and stand by that anytime I want. He's a fucking MP now, this guy, Sam Uffindel. And we've heard that National knew about this attack before they allowed him to be one of their candidates, before they put him in to be one of their candidates. Now, whether they knew the extent of it or not, I don't know. We're being told that this little prick was a part of a group who beat up a 13-year-old when they were 15, 16, 17. And he can't confirm whether they used bed legs to beat this child or not. Let me read you something. I've some comments coming in tonight from people who are at boarding school. I went to boarding school. I loved boarding school. Maybe one of the reasons I'm so angry about this is this little prick is the example of someone who went to boarding school that gives the boarding school a bad name. I went to a place called Sacred Heart College, loved it, loved boarding school, loved being there. It was like being on a camp with 30 of my best mates all year round, loved it. But there's a reputation around boarding schools that kids get abused, that kids get beaten up in bullied and stuff. And this little prick is the example as to why that is out there. This privileged, self-entitled, wealthy little fuckwit. Right. So just have a listen to this, especially if you're a boarder, right? At whatever school you were at, if this happened to you. He had been in his bed in his dorm room after lights out when 4 older boys come in and jumped on him and began beating him. He said, this is the guy who was attacked. He said he thought the boys had been using wooden bed legs unscrewed from their dorms. I was covering my head. They were smashing me, he said. I don't remember much, but when it was over, everyone ran into the next dorm and lay down on the floor between the beds there to hide. The victim says later on there were photos taken of his injuries. They show this skinny little white kid covered in bruises, he said. His ribs weren't cracked, but there was some damage to cartilage. Now, another reason I'm pretty pissed about this and pretty passionate about it is, let's just be honest, right? I'm going to play the race card. If this was a brown, poor kid from South Auckland, first of all, he wouldn't have been, quote, asked to leave. He would have been fucking expelled. How can you, what's this language going around the media at the moment that this little prick was asked to leave because he assaulted a 13-year-old, potentially with a wooden bed leg? The other thing this little prick, this little asshole, this little fuckwit has come out saying today was this, quote, "It was one of the silliest, stupidest things I've ever done. I really regretted it, and I do really regret it still." Just let that mull on you for a minute. This was one of the silliest, stupidest things. So this is not the stupidest thing he's ever done. This was one of them. So what else has this little prick been up to be anywhere that in any kind of leadership role in this country? This little prick, if he was a brown poor boy from South Auckland at a boarding school, there'd be words like violent offender. There'd be words like anger. There's no way they'd be walking into a position like this with this being hidden away from the voters until it gets brought out by the victim as the person who's brought this story out. And the reason the victims brought this story out was because this little prick apologized to him just before he went into politics. Oh, there's a coincidence. He just felt after 20 years that was the right time to try and mea culpa to the guy he potentially beat with a wooden leg from a bed. That was the appropriate time to do it. He just felt that for no real reason. He just felt that was the right time to do it. Nothing to do with him trying to get into politics. Yeah, right. Tui billboard. Oh, please, Tui, I will donate to you. I will donate to you if you make that a billboard. Someone watching, Photoshop me a billboard, tweet it to me. Something like, I didn't apologize because I was getting into politics. Sam Uffindel. Yeah, right. Good one. And I'm really shocked and disgusted. And look, you guys all know I'm not a national voter at all, right? But I'm really disappointed in the National Party as one of our political parties that they would have this person as one of their candidates. Look, I know that there's a redemption story. I know that people can do stupid things in their teens. We've all done them and go by them. But to be honest, the victim in this says, and this is the article, says that the apology doesn't feel real. And it's obvious to me, at least, it's my honest held belief, that the apology was based around, he realized he was going to get into politics and he better clean up this mess from his younger age group. And just the idea that and I'll say this, it feels to me when you're wealthy and privileged and white, you get asked to leave King's College after you assault someone. When you're poor and brown and in South Auckland, well, then what happens is you get expelled, So I'm just, I'm completely over it. There's a thing within boarding, and bear with me if this word finds you offensive, because it doesn't mean what it's going to say and say it means straight away. There's a thing called fagging in boarding schools, and no, it's nothing to do with that. It comes from the 1700s in England, and fagging is when older boys basically have the younger boys as servants. That's what it's called. And I was at boarding school in the 1990s. I went to Sacred Heart College. I had friends who were at King's College. This is the school that this guy is from. Now, in that situation, fagging was still happening at King's, right? It was still going on. It was still happening. And it was a part of everyday life. Often fagging, which is a power imbalance between boys with no frontal lobe development, turns into an abusive relationship. And when I read this story, that's all I could think of. And I'm really annoyed about it. And I'm really annoyed that this person is now in the halls of power. And this person has spent the last week in the halls of power, this little prick, bitching at Labour for being soft on crime. Well, he got to walk away from an assault when he was 16 and go off to another expensive private boys' school. All right, team, that's us. We're done. We're dusted. I appreciate you being with us tonight. This is obviously the best of it. It is pre-recorded, as you can see by the changing people and the changing hats, mostly. As you will notice, this hat that I'm wearing now hasn't changed through these introductions and outros because I recorded them all at the same time. These hats here, see? Welcome to the show if you're new. I'm glad you've been on board with us. And if you want to get involved more, if you want to be someone who helps us make it, then what you can do is you can get involved on our Patreon, patreon.com/Big Hairy News. There's 6 levels of support there if you want to get involved. But we'll talk about that already. So go and have a look if you like what we're doing, and happy to have you on board. Let's rip into tomorrow night's show with what's coming up. When I say rip into, I mean, we're not going to start it. That starts tomorrow night at 10 p.m. But tomorrow night's show, we're having a bit of an expose actually into how Sean Plunkett basically abused Dr. Suze Wilson. That'll be on tomorrow night's episode. Professor Tom Roa on copywriting against cultural appropriation. Professor Tom Roa is from Waikato University. Dr. Anna Brooks, cancelling the traffic light system is terrible for vulnerable communities is the name of the clip. So that's coming up tomorrow night. And also I spend some time speaking about, in tomorrow night's show, speaking about what's happened with Sam Uffindel at King's College. Now, I was a boarder at school, and I also worked as a boarding master, they called them, in a school. So I have a good amount of knowledge in the area of what happens in boarding schools. And tomorrow night, I play a clip where we talk about that. And also a clip where Susie Ferguson holds Christopher Luxon's feet to the fire that's coming up tomorrow night as well. All right, my good friends, thank you for being with us tonight, and we will see you tomorrow night from 10 p.m. for another best of edition of Big Hairy News. Hooroo!